Hello. For this session, our chairman is Aaron Kingsborough, Chief Evangelist and Product Manager for Perfecto by Perforce. And his guest is Trevor Pollard, Vice President of Quality Management at IGM Financial. Aaron's joining us from, I think, Boston, and Trevor from Toronto, where IGM is based. IGM, a 160 billion Canadian dollar assets under management business, very, very substantial. And the topic is lessons learned on the journey to modernizing testing. And with that, I'm going to hand over to you, Aaron.
Thank you, Matthew. And I'm honored to be here in the QA Financial US with Trevor from IGM. As mentioned, I'm the Chief Evangelist and a Product Manager for Perfecto. And in today's session, I would like to actually hear a lot from Trevor on how they progress their continuous testing within their Agile and DevOps implementation towards a successful implementation of software quality deliverables. So to you now, Trevor.
Excellent. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm just going to multitask a bit while I throw up my my slides. I don't have too many slides; it won't be death by PowerPoint. But I do want to just start. So IGM Financial is not a retail brand, and so we are actually the parent company to three retail brands. One is IG Wealth Management, Mackenzie Investments, and IPC, which is the Investment Planning Council. And we ourselves are then part of the Power Corp umbrella, which worldwide holds roughly $1 trillion AUM. One of the reasons that we thought it was good to come and speak here is IGM's been in the middle of a 5-year, or is about in the middle of a 5-year transformation agenda to really move away from our paper-based approaches, which is pretty standard and typical within the industry up here in Canada. The story I'm going to start with is really a funny one and a near one that I'm dear to my heart, and then I'll get to the slide that you see on the screen. So I'm picture this. I'm 6 days into the job at IGM, and my boss at the time pulls me aside and he says, I'm headed to a meeting. I'd love you to join on. I don't expect you to to really know too many of the players, but we're seeming to be having an issue. I love that word, seem to be having a performance issue within our new client portal. And as I talked about the transition or the transformation, one of the first things we were doing was actually uplifting a fairly archaic client portal into a more modern one powered by Salesforce. And so this is spring, and it's going live in fall. So, I feel honored to have months in order to solve whatever problem we're about to walk into. And so we sit down in the meeting, and I'm listening to them go, and it's pretty typical, hey, we ran this test, and it looks like it's slow and all, but I ran the test as well, and it seemed to really fast. And so the meeting's about halfway over, and I pull aside and I kind of say, okay, I got a couple questions. So it says, how many tests, have we actually run? And a voice on the phone, which I will learn on day 7, is actually an employee of mine, says, oh, we've got 5 tests. And so my follow-up question when we talk about mobile testing is, okay, well, how many devices? And the same person answers, oh, 5 devices. And so I'm feeling a bit confident because I'm like, okay, well, that's not bad. That's not great, but it's decent. So I said, feeling a bit confident and whatnot, I said, well, let me play back what I just heard. So we have 25 unique results running 5 tests across 5 devices, and the room goes completely quiet. And the same voice on the line goes, no, we have 5 results, 1 run against 5 different devices. And I said, oh, okay. And now dreading the answer to my final question of that meeting was, well, so which devices did we pick? And without skipping a beat, 3 people in the room and a bunch of people on the phone all hold up or tell me that they're working off their personal devices. And I look at them and I kind of say, okay, so we really can't do performance testing or usability testing that way. And we really need to sort of move forward on that. And so I reached out at that time to Perfecto, who I'd worked with previously in my career. And I said, look, I need 1 test case across 5 devices, run 5 times so that we can get a culmination of data points and we can figure out if there's an actual issue. And really what they were doing is what you see on the screen here. So no one's ever going to, in the quality management space, test nothing, right? And so what they do is they pick, especially when it's mobile, or especially when it's manual and mobile, they pick a couple devices. Now, that's great if your user base only uses those devices. And as quality professionals, we'd always want the right side of this page, which is we test all devices, all application anomalies, but it really gets quite expensive. And so we ended up running the test. We probably set it up with Perfecto's help in, I'm going to say, 4 weeks, which is unheard of in a larger financial institution. And we didn't just find one performance issue. We actually found several. And we were able to run the tests in order to allow the teams to make the right decisions in order to move forward with that fall release. We didn't cost the fall release, but we definitely executed a better product for it. And so as we kind of went into the details of the slide you see in front of you around the cost of running. So these are our costs up in Canada. So to run a test case, the execution of a test case is roughly about $9.50, $9.42. And the first question I always get is, why not just move it offshore? And absolutely, you can do that, and you're probably going to get a big pat on your back for being able to get it down to about $2.50. But manual testing still has an inherent slowness to it. And so we really needed to get the execution down to less than $1 so that we could do sustainable, continual testing. And that's when we really knew that we had to go and work with a partner like Perfecto in order to get at that, dollar to sub-dollar execution cost.
So Trevor, it's not just about transitioning from manual to automation and maybe reducing the need for offshore. It's also as you said, continuous testing. It's continuous maintenance of these test cases, which tend to change together with the devices as well, which is another factor here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a great transition into this slide, because really you're absolutely correct. It's not about running the tests once, right? If you look at sort of that traditional landscape of automation, right? And I've had many bosses in my career tell me that, automation's a Ponzi scheme. You keep putting money in, but you don't see the value out because the scripts are always in maintenance. And that makes perfect sense if you're running a script once or twice. But if you're doing actual continual testing, then you're running a script hundreds, if not thousands of times. And that's what really then drives that value down. And then the parallelism that you get from a tool like Perfecto also then means you get to the end result faster, whether it be positive or negative. And so before I go and sort of talk a bit about the slide you see in front of you, I want to draw your attention to the kind of funky Rubik's Cube looking thing. So when we set up our continuous testing environment, and I love telling people this, because I'm sure as quality managers and quality leaders, we've all heard, the testing is taking too long. Not why it's taking too long, just it's taking too long. And we have to dig into it. And my response, I don't know about you, but my response is always, well, I only actually need to test it once. So maybe we should figure out why we have to test it 5, 6, 7 times, which is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek. It makes me feel good, but it doesn't actually, advance the business at all. And so when we actually looked at setting up our continuous testing environment, once we had our assets sort of digitized, we actually couldn't run it faster than twice a week. And that's why you see sort of the striping of colors, because our other practices, so our implementation practices, our dev practices, and to an extent, our agile practices were still heavily or importantly weighted on manual processes. So we actually got to a place, if you noticed, I talk about empowering, yes. We actually got to a place where we had to ask them, well, what would you like us to do with the downtime? Because we can get the testing done very quickly. We can get the testing sort of through the gears. And so we sort of set it up in such a way that, every 2 days or every 3 days, roughly, we end up rerunning the tests across 3 of our primary platforms here. But to get at the cost here, so, when I look at it and you go to the previous page, which talked about, $9 and $2, that's really what this wave is for. No one's ever going to spend, and if you are part of a company that will spend this much money on what is effectively regression testing, send me a quick LinkedIn. I'd like to work for a company like that, but no one's spending $253,000 a week on testing. And so what ends up happening is you start poking holes in it, right? And you start saying, okay, well, I'm not gonna test this device, and you kind of start to show the picture on the previous page. And we do that. I want to be clear. We do talk about, okay, if I have, 2 like Apple devices, do I need to do all the tests on both, or can I kind of smartly test it? And But we get the option to pick that versus, you know, being forced as quality management into a position of compromise. And so as we ran through it, really had to rely on getting our testing down to less than $1 a test case. We had, you know, these 3 major projects, and if you annualize them, because they are agile, which means they're constantly releasing, they're constantly being affected by, you know, Apple or Android releases. They're constantly, you know, under pressure from other areas within our company. You know, we priced the cost for just these 3 at about 3 to 11 million. 11 million being on you know, locally, 3 million being if you took that work and you moved it offshore completely. And we weren't willing or able to spend that much money. And so we worked with Perfecto and we kind of said, okay, what's the smart tests to execute? And you'll see a little bit of that on the next page. Like, what are those actual smart tests? What are the things that we need to do differently? And what does that look like? And we've actually been able to get our monthly costs. So this is a weekly page, but we've been able to get our monthly costs down to about 10K for this piece of work. Again, because it's constantly running, it's constantly executing in the environment, and it allows the development teams and the infrastructure teams to put their code up without affecting, you know, a quality manual tester or a functional tester in that space. And so we really sort of push towards, you know, trying to figure out what's that right balance and how do we sort of cost contain. And, you know, being able to be down into that price point with the continuous testing has really allowed, you know, as a quality manager at the end of the delivery pipeline, you know, to sit there and say, okay, well, what else would you like me to do? Would you like me to test more? Would you like me to test differently? And how can we kind of, you know, move these assets both into prod and back into dev. And so we moved them into prod first, which was so we actually have our continuous testing running both in the test environments and a subset of that running in prod, just so that we can see kind of how things are operating and how we kind of move it forward. And this is things that you can't do with people, whether they're local or otherwise. They don't want to run at 3 in the morning, right? These tests run 6 p.m. to 8 a.m. And it's just a time area which just doesn't work. So, you know, it's one of those things where as you kind of work through it, you kind of go through your paces of how do you contain the costs, how do you actually move the needle. It was super important for me, and it was super important for the organization to remove that. Well, why is testing so long? Because we needed to be able to move just as fast as our other development areas, and even faster in some respects. And so, really, that paradigm shift is a great position for you know, a QM leader to be in, because we don't get to do it very often. Most of the time, we're being squeezed. Most of the time, you know, someone else has taken up our contingency, and that still happens. I don't want to paint a picture of like that never happens. We still do manual testing where, you know, for new functions, we still do manual testing in some other more legacy apps that aren't digital, and we have all those natural sort of squeeze points or choke points. So it's good to see, you know, that in at least an area within our sort of test suite, we've been able to sort of overcome. And maybe last more probably for Canada, these actually run across both French and English, which, you know, is no easy feat. It seems like it should be easy, but it's actually a more complicated endeavor than I think even we thought when we first reached out on this page. So yeah.
So just one comment. It's all not a question, but just double clicking on the cube that you are presenting. You know, looking at the device combination and the application functions and potentially the environments. I think that that's the beauty, and you talked about value, right? Getting value from continuous testing, whether you're doing it twice a week or every day or per each code change, depending on the agility of your developers. I think that looking at this cube as a model for building the continuous testing and, you know, putting the right test cases, the right configurations of devices and operating systems and network conditions and stuff like that within this cube, it really gives you this nice coverage that you get from you know, dealing with both an agile project and a cloud service. So I really like this cube approach.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the, and it's not here, but to sort of to push the point home, now that we've got these assets running, you're absolutely correct. We're not just running it on our corporate Wi-Fi. We're running it on corporate Wi-Fi. We're running it on LT. We're running it on, low battery. And one of the ones that we've probably seen the most value out of is when we're doing traditional performance testing. We run these scripts as well. And the key isn't so much that you run it when that happens. You've actually run it when you haven't had load on the system through your natural pipeline. And so then when you actually run it with load, you're not only just looking at sort of that traditional performance of CPU and callbacks, but you can actually go and say, okay, at 11 o'clock on one night with no load, it ran at this time. And then here it ran here. And you don't have one data set. You have hundreds of data set over the course of the product's life cycle, and it really helps you. We talk about, and I'm sure everyone's talking about, sort of shifting left on this aspect. Really hard to do in performance testing because it's an expensive test that you run, closer to the end because you don't want to have to run it a lot of times. Using a tool, especially Perfecto, in a continuous testing manner, doesn't do traditional performance testing, but it certainly lets you know if somebody's uploaded a piece of code that's all of a sudden performing incorrectly without load on the system, so that you have a greater chance of success as you move through, as you move towards, your production date. And it's been the only way that I've been able to in my career to actually shift the performance testing left versus, say, functional testing or other types of more traditional testing. It's a great call out. So really walk, crawl, run, so we're 700 days. So I'm 700 days into the job. And so where are we and where do we kind of want to go? And I was actually just telling Aaron beforehand, as I was putting the slides together, the first one is around the effectiveness of our or the efficiency, of our execution. And really this gets down to okay, how do we go to sub $1? And we're actually around 92 cents for an execution, and that makes up 72 cents for writing the script originally, and the tool Perfecto, and then 20 cents we put on top for any maintenance, right? Because your scripts are going to have to change. They're going to need to go into what we call the garage. And again, there's nothing special here. It's just about the volume of execution before a script has to go into the garage and get updated. And so we're driving at around 92 cents, which is great. What we haven't seen yet is a huge uptick in our device complement. So what we are starting to do, later this year and into next year is we're expanding where we use our mobile lab. So we're expanding it into, we've always been focused on the client and the advisor in our business, but we're actually now expanding it into the employee with our HR systems and our portals and all of our other sort of systems there. So we do actually start to expect that we're going to see that, that 92 cents per execution start to move up on that target space that you see to the left there. One of the pieces that we did with Perfecto, and it was a great piece of work, was smartly designing what we execute. So lots of times you'll have a suite of your test cases, and you'll be like, well, I'm just going to automate that, right? And one of the things in a continuous testing environment is, would you do something if that test failed, right? Because you've got limited time. You don't want to test up there where a developer or even a quality manager says, well, yeah, that one fails all the time. It's okay, let's move past it. And so smartly designing, more complicated test cases that cover more of a business feel than, say, a SIT or maybe a targeted feel. And so really writing those types of test cases, especially where we do automation, we've thought was super important and super valuable to land here, and where we want to put that investment. Again, making sure that we're executing the right tests at the right time. The area that we do have some work to do in, on top of obviously, moving up the number of devices we use, is kind of where we find defects. So we still very traditionally find them in the testing environment, which for a lot of agile and a lot of spaces, it's an expensive place. It's not as obviously expensive as prod, but it's an expensive place to find defects. And so now that we've got our assets built out, now that they've shown, a continuous improvement, and a continuous modernization and resilience to them, we're now looking at how do we bring it into the lower environments. I'm assuming that there might be a couple of developers on the call, but developers are great at developing, but they're not always great at testing. And so we traditionally we said, oh, developers know their code best. They should definitely be the ones that test it. And there's definitely some logic and merit in that. But they also have brought their assumptions forward. So they've brought their assumptions that they developed the code with, and they're going to bring those same assumptions when they test it. And so being able, without extra effort, to say, hey, why don't you just run these scripts? Why don't you put that code, right after you think it's ready, why don't you put that code up into the side environment over here that's also running the same scripts just continuously? Because again, there's no incremental QM cost to that. And just see if it works before you go and put it back into that main stack. And so that's something, as we mature out and as we automate into the rest of our CDIC pipeline, that's going to be something that we're definitely going to want to look to do over the next year and a half, both within the Salesforce space and within some of our legacy areas. And so that's kind of where we're at and kind of where we're on in our journey. Would be happy to from Aaron, any questions, but also any questions from the group. I know I've talked a bit quick, so I'm a little bit early.
Before the question, just one comment. I think that this is an impressive journey towards not just cost saving, but from a process perspective, I think you have built a very good and sustainable process for continuous testing, which is great. Double clicking on the timing for defect discovery, and we know that the more you go to the right, the price of defects obviously increases. I still see and think that quality engineering should be, always the voice of the customer and the ones that are finding the majority of the bugs, the ones that are really critical. And by shifting, obviously, their activities, the single user performance that you talked about earlier, the test automation to the cycle, to the build acceptance testing, will allow you to still gain ownership of these defects, but they will be earlier in the development cycle. And that's obviously where you're aiming, which is great. So I just wanted to make sure it's clear.
Yeah, and it's a great call out, because one of the things I know when I was selling, the idea both up, but also the idea to my own team, because this was, when I joined, I would say we had a fairly weak QA. We had sort of a traditional, order taking QA organization and not really a partnering quality management organization. And they were super fearful when I talked about automation with this one or any other about losing their jobs. And I said, look, this is not about that. Right? We're actually understaffed from where we need to be. What this is about is freeing up, all of that capital knowledge and all of that value of my, 20-year tenure testers or even 5-year tenure testers to find the harder to find defects, to find those bugs that really aren't there was a deployment issue, right? Like that stuff. Let the systems figure that out and let my teams go and find those more value add defects. And that's probably been the biggest. It's a great call out, because, this wasn't ever let's just contain or restrict our costs or our investment. And that was one of the, when selling it up, it was about investment and not cost, right? It's about how do we show that value? And it's both the value in finding things earlier, but also the value in freeing up my team in order to find the more difficult defects to find. And so no, that was it's not on this slide, but definitely probably for my test team and the businesses that they support as their advocates has been the greatest one.
Great. So with that, again, thank you, Trevor, for putting this together. And I think it was, in my mind, really insightful to see, the journey from A to Z. And you're not done yet. You have a great agenda going forward. So with that, I would probably get it back to you, Matthew, if there are any questions from the audience.
Yes, thank you, Aaron. There are a couple. Thank you, Trevor. We did have one. You mentioned that IGM is part of the larger Power Group, or is majority owned by Power. And like a lot of larger financial firms, larger financial organizations with multiple subsidiaries, there's always the question about how you share best practice and what you've learned in one part of the business, across the broader group. The questioner wants to know, do you share ideas within Power? So I've sort of elaborated on that, but maybe you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So within Power, like we're talking, we've got mining companies, we've got all sorts of assets, but within the wealth space, so that's insurance, that's wealth, that's us, or in the fintech space, so insurance here and asset management, we do actually have a regular sort of touch point quarterly to just talk about sort of what are we doing, what are they doing, and that actually includes Wealthsimple, right? So we own a fairly hefty stake in Wealthsimple, and they are, they're the robo advisor, in Canada and elsewhere. They're very modern in their practices. They don't have that legacy debt that a normal financial institution, a traditional one would have. So really learning from them in some of their practices around really what they're willing to throw away from a test investment perspective, and really just they're cutthroat on, and in a good way, but they're cutthroat on, that test isn't, it's not a valid test, move on type thing. And having been born completely digital, they have an advantage, but we haven't then an advantage of being able to learn from them. And then when we look at, say, Canada Life, which is, the insurance side, their size, right? They've got the more of a, what I'd call the bank traditional model, right? So a lot of onshore, a lot of offshore, and a smattering of automation, but we can take a lot from their size and vice versa. So absolutely, we share not as much as we should. We should share more amongst the groups, but every opportunity we can, we try to get together.
Okay, and Aaron, I'd like to ask you a question actually. Great presentation, Trevor. Thank you very much, Aaron.
Sure.
Not how typical is IGM or the financial firms you deal with? That would be a rather pointless question. But what are the challenges that maybe IGM has in common with other large financial firms, and where do you think it's got an edge?
Sure. So I think that can be an entire presentation. I think that varies. It's obviously the scale, the security behind having a test environment, the different personas that such a large organization has, which means different tool chain, different skill sets, okay, different geography locations, okay, different, so many requirements and so many objectives that are coming into this. We have shown previously the cube, right? The cube is a list of challenges at the end of the day, because it means you have a great number of applications, whether they are small, big, internal, external. You have so many devices, sometimes devices and browsers, okay? You have a small team which does manual testing. You have a team that does performance testing, the one team that does compliance and security. So I would say, think big. That's what I see in common with most of these financial and insurance companies. They need to do all of what I've just said in a very short amount of time. Trevor was saying, 2 full regressions in a week, okay? And he's not talking about a full regression of 5 tests on 5 devices, right? He's not 700 days back. He's in 2020. So we're talking about thousands and sometimes tens and thousands of executions per week. And that's basically the challenge here, to sustain that, because developers keep getting more requirements, story points, they develop the next feature. And oh, by the way, the market keeps changing, new operating systems, new platforms, and so on. So I hope I haven't scared anyone, but that's, just part of the story.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think just really quickly on that, because I know we're running out of time. 2 things that you do have to solve for in order to go at that pace is environment management and data management. So your data can't be constantly changing, or your scripts are going to constantly be in the garage. You have to not right away, but you have to solve for those to get at pace within the problem. That would be something we stubbed our toe on that I'd want to let people know about.
Trevor and Aaron, thank you very much indeed. We're going to have to end there.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.